Appreciate the intro. Welcome, Stani, Robert, Diane, Rune, and Andre. Yeah, just maybe start with a very quick high-level question for everyone here. How do you think about the future of DeFi? Where's DeFi going? Maybe we can start with Stani.
Yeah, for the future, I think it's very relative because things move very rapidly in the space. I mean, I would never expect DeFi to be even at this stage and this scale as it is today, 6 months or 12 months ago. So there's more and more innovation now than ever before. There are more builders, there are more users, and more actually community members that are embracing the spirit of DeFi and decentralization and the permissionless nature of being able to access any kind of financial protocol and also build any kind of a new part of the whole ecosystem. I think in general, how things are evolving mainly this fast is because we have open permissionless network at the moment where anyone can just come and build and innovate things and also get inspired from other builders that have already deployed protocols within the community. And that is why things evolve so quickly. And seeing how things are moving, it's very highly likely that the kind of a software and ecosystem environment that we have created, what DeFi is known today, will just kind of expand. It's just like a kind of a financial operating system that allows to create better, open, transparent finance, and it just onboards more and more builders and users into the space. So I think what happens is that we'll see more innovation, but also we will see that this DeFi kind of as a backend will empower not just creator community, but other kind of communities around that will be built on Web3. For example, it might be social media or something new that didn't exist yet on the Web3 platform itself. But I think essentially what will happen is that things will move as fast as now, and we'll see more adoption, and maybe kind of DeFi as a whole network will become a part of the software stack of the traditional, let's say, intermediaries that are providing already different kinds of financial services that would just use the DeFi infrastructure as part of their software stack and create the accessibility to wider audience. I think this is the kind of direction we're going in the future.
Thanks, Stani. Robert, you want to go next? I'm just going according to the order on my Zoom. So Robert, go for it. You're on mute.
I think DeFi is not going to be called DeFi in 5-10 years. It's just going to be finance, and all finance is going to happen to run on blockchains. I think one of the things that I anticipate is that most assets are eventually going to make their way onto blockchains, whether it's stocks or bonds or all currencies. Every asset's eventually going to live in an accessible and open, financial metaverse. And I think at that point, we're going to see a complete blurring of the lines. And I'm not going to say it's DeFi. We're just going to say this is where finance operates. It just happens to be more transparent, faster, cheaper, more programmable, and open for everybody. And, I don't think it's going to have assets that are DeFi native or crypto native. I think we're going to be playing around with assets. I think eventually you're going to have US treasuries being traded, borrowed, and hacked and slashed in these protocols. And so that's what I'm excited about. And I think the future is assets that aren't yet a part of this ecosystem coming in.
Diane?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think DeFi, I think, will access to Web3 more and more in the future. Yeah, just like Robert said, from the asset level, I think there will be more and more assets, different kinds of assets, not just a fungible token, but also maybe non-fungible tokens and other kind of asset could be digital and could be running on blockchain, and that is a new kind of value storage and swapped, traded on blockchains. Yeah, and I think in a short time we'll see more like lending protocols and trading protocols enable like NFT assets from the peer-to-peer model to peer-to-pool model to support NFT asset to have a better liquidity here. Yeah, and another part besides asset, I think community will play a more important role in the DeFi community. Yeah, because I think my observation is I think the kicking off new DeFi projects gets a little bit harder and harder because now like a lot of investors here I think are value the influencers and QLs back the new DeFi projects more than its innovations. Yeah, as is, there is some trend like this. Yeah, but I think there are disadvantage and there are advantage. The advantage is okay. The projects will value the community more and put more hard work into token design and manage well the social media. But on the other hand is I think new big DeFi protocols will be a little bit harder for new entrepreneurs. Yeah, and I think this kind of trends will be better when we have next generation blockchain infrastructure. Yeah, because I think the current side chains and also layer 2 rollups are not just temporary solutions for like 2 or 3 years old. Yeah, but in a longer term, like in a decade, there will be new infrastructure of blockchains for DeFi, and by then there will be another wave of massive innovations. Yeah, this is my perspective from the macro observation. Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it. Rune, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of the different statements that have already been made. I think it's kind of, so Robert, for instance, made the point that all the traditional assets that we know are going to move on chain, right? And I've heard this a couple of times in the past couple of months, right? This thing about like in the future, DeFi and TradFi will both just be called finance, which I generally agree with. And I think for a long time, particular in Maker and sort of the way that our protocol has been positioned, essentially, it was sort of something that we didn't fully expect. But this movement of a lot of DeFi protocols just becoming more of like a backend that isn't really even being seen by the end user, right? And that's actually a really sweet spot for DeFi protocols to be this sort of engine, this machinery that lies under the hood. And then you have all sorts of financial institutions and all sorts of more traditionally looking or feeling front ends tapping into them and using them to transact in all of these, all of the financial activity and all the assets that are out there. But then at the same time, I also completely agree with the points raised about, we've already seen this Cambrian explosion sort of, happening completely exclusively inside DeFi was sort of really, in a sense, there's sort of nothing to work with, right? We've created all of this stuff, all of this money and all this value out of nothing, essentially. We started out with tokens that really, don't really have necessarily an intrinsic value, right? But then we just built on top of that and on top of that and created this whole complex system that is to some extent able to sort of keep its own value afloat, in a sense, based on just its own internal innovation, essentially. And that's things like unlocking the power of community, which we're also seeing with NFTs, where there's this completely untapped landscape of some sort of intangible value that I don't think anyone would have really predicted. And where I think all of this stuff is going is when these two worlds really start colliding, right? When DeFi really starts to break through into the real world and really start to interact with the traditional financial system. In the places where that initially becomes possible, of course, because that's another thing. I think it will be quite asymmetric how we'll see that happen. And then, so that's going to be one big move forward and something that's really going to catalyze a lot of growth and another wave of innovation. Then on top of that, it will be compounded by these just sort of exponential innovation in the sort of deep crypto, deep decentralization space of tokenomics, yield farming, NFTs. I like to call all that stuff black magic, really. You know, it's like really this kind of this financial force that we don't fully understand yet. And once we can apply that to the real world and use that to actually, you know, improve the traditional financial system and improve the way that value flows and capital is allocated, then I think you know, there's some tremendous social and economic benefit that can really be unlocked by this. And that's where the final thing, then it really all comes down to how, you know, basically how prepared or sort of how open the different countries and jurisdictions are to accept all of this, you know, all of these benefits that are headed their way. And I would, you know, I think in particular, we've seen in the US just in a recent sort of just the past couple of months. I mean, at least for me personally, if you asked me just 6 months ago, I would really think that the US would be kind of the epicenter of this. Now I actually think that a lot of people are probably just, I mean, a lot of builders today are probably just looking, one of the main things that they're thinking about is how do you sort of hedge, you know, your exposure to the US, or sort of your you know, how much you rely on the US market just because of how uncertain so the regulatory environment is there, and so even the political environment in a sense, right? And it's going to be really interesting to see where these places where, you know, you have societies that are ready to sort of embrace, I don't know, tokenomics, right, on allocating their capital and this black magic, right, these new forms of innovation and financial power, because it's gonna really, you know, the ones who are the first movers in this, they're gonna I mean, it's gonna be a leap of faith to a certain extent to really embrace this and let it into your financial system. But it's also going to be how the winners and the losers are picked, right? This is going to make a, you know, huge difference. The world is going to change significantly in the next decade, and those who are, you know, who are ready to embrace innovation and position themselves accordingly, I think they will see a huge benefit.
Awesome. I feel like everyone so far mentioned the community and composability aspect of DeFi. And for me personally, Wi-Fi was the first time during DeFi summer that I realized the power of composability. So Andre, what do you think? How do you think about the future of DeFi?
I think to actually comment on the future of DeFi, we need to talk about weed. So 20 years ago, right, if you wanted to go buy some weed, you had to climb in some dude's car you didn't know, and then you had to drive 2 hours to another dude that you didn't know. And then he gave you some dodgy grass in a little bag, and you just hoped, you know, it was like not just real grass that someone mowed the lawn and threw in there, and it was like filled with seeds, and it was nasty and stuff, and like no one liked it. And everyone spoke about the war on drugs and all of these things. But, you know, nowadays in most states, countries, places, you walk into a shop and you're like, yeah, I'll have that 3rd generation purple Kush indica on shelf 2 that is 2 years matured, you know, and that's what you end up taking home. And I think just like I would like to congratulate drugs on winning the war on drugs, I think, you know, in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, we're going to have that same conversation and we're going to congratulate crypto on winning the war on crypto. So I think we're going to go into a little bit of a dark phase. You know, I think regulatory bodies are now showing that they want to try and shut us down. And the fact is we can't, you know, like even if I wanted to today, there's nothing I can do about yearn. I can't shut it down. I can't stop it. I can't block it. I don't control any keys, any websites, anything. But that's not going to change regulatory institutions from trying to make my life miserable. They're going to, try and scare me. They're going to threaten me. They're going to send me subpoenas, etc. And they're going to keep doing things like this. But eventually, they're going to realize there's nothing they can do, and then they're going to move into acceptance. And then I agree with what all of the other panelists said. We're going to see mass migration of assets on chain. I think stablecoins, or let's call them rather pegged coins, have shown us that ownership and that value of provenance is really powerful, really important, even if it comes from a centralized entity. Tether, Circle, etc. Paxos Trust. There's so many good ones to name, but they've all shown us that even if it originates from a centralized point, it still increases the provenance, the security, everything. So I agree. Mass migration. I do think we're going to see some dark times, because all that's going to happen with regulatory uncertainty over the next few months or years, it's just going to cause more people to go anonymous. It's going to cause more people to not incorporate. It's going to cause more people to work out of non-recognized institutions and regulatory oversight, which is going to be bad. But when we get past that, and once people accept they can't stop this thing that's happening, I really think we're going to see a different future.
Cool. Really great insights so far from everyone. Since a couple of you already brought up the fairly controversial or hot topic of regulations, I do want to touch a little bit more, expand a little bit more on that. And obviously, many of you mentioned that the future of DeFi will involve a lot of traditional asset classes and bringing in traditional, potentially financial institutions into DeFi, and regulations will play an enormous role into this. And I think that's something that really bugs a lot of, especially new founders. Like at DeFi Alliance, almost every single one of our founders is confused by what's happening in DC, especially in the US, and also by and large around the world. So I'm curious how you think about like some of the specific, regulations or trends that founders need to be aware of, and perhaps also like what all of you are super successful like founders of protocols. Like, what do you do about these regulations? And totally understand if there's something that can't be said here, but feel free to anyone feel free to jump in here.
I'll start by saying that I think we're at a point where there's a lot of interest in regulating DeFi, because it's growing in scale and it's growing in importance, and it's no longer something that anybody can sleep on. When DeFi in aggregate, I remember when it was, DeFi Pulse was $50 million. It was MakerDAO and Compound, and it was like that was the size of DeFi. It's in the hundreds of billions now, not just on Ethereum but across many blockchains. And it's now at the scale where there's an interest. I think the thing to understand is that step one starts with educating. Right now, I think the environment is reactionary, and I think that a lot of folks that are taking an interest in DeFi in the US and abroad, in many countries, are just learning about it for the first time when we've been building for years. And so I think the first thing that has to occur is education, explaining the difference between MakerDAO and the DAO, and explaining what DeFi is and how it works, and just really getting the very basics of why this is better, why it's safer, why it's more transparent, why it's more fair, why this is the future of finance. Because I think as we start to educate, regulators and policymakers, I think we're going to find that there's a lot of very receptive minds to this because it's a better system. But right now there's a lot of confusion. And I think, the reactionary approach that's being taken is extremely detrimental. So I think everyone has to do a better job in educating.
Yeah, I totally agree with Robert, and I think that so in Maker we've been reaching out to all these regulators and sort of doing our part in trying to educate for great many years, basically. And what we found, and we've primarily focused on the US, and like I said earlier, right, the US is generally sort of the center of the the global economy, right? And it's really the place you want to. It's the best place to have good friends, obviously, and be sort of anchored and based. So we did focus a lot on the US in particular. We went to a lot of agencies and went to DC and talked to a whole bunch of people. And it's, I mean, what I found is that we made a lot of friends, and we've managed to I mean, we've done this sort of education effort in a whole lot of places. Yet there's just, really to Robert's point, there's just such a huge amount of people that were never reached at all, right? And it's sort of impossible to even get to them in a sense, right? Because there are many that are just coming from this completely different perspective, where it's really, I mean, the only way they would ever think about DeFi, I believe, right, is really as something, this is some sort of threat to a power, or some, this is some sort of issue, and it's in that context that they care about it, right? They're not like someone who cares about finance or cares about technology in general. And it's from that I've come to think that, you can really, there in particular places like the US, the European Union, and China as well, these places have a sort of a different stance as it relates to DeFi and blockchain technology. I mean, and I think it's because specifically this is about like innovation. And I mean, you can trace it back to sort of Bitcoin, right? Which was this revolutionary thing that was going to completely turn society upside down and sort of really change the balance of power on a global scale, right? And I actually think that because these massive unions, essentially, they are, massive geopolitical entities, they're great powers. They have this sort of different perspective on power in a sense. And that's what I believe is a big reason why you just find this kind of like, I guess, a little bit aggressive approach there that, in my opinion, you don't really see anything like it in more sort of independent, smaller countries that are not, that just fundamentally don't sit and sort of are part of the, ruling the entire planet. And that's kind of my theory, is that that's really how, I mean, to what I was alluding to earlier, right? That the most important thing actually is that even if we can't necessarily get a smooth sailing in the US in the short run, the most important thing is to make sure that we do break through in some of these sort of more, what's called resilient and sort of more diversified jurisdictions, something like, Canada, Singapore, UK, Switzerland, right? And as long as we're able to do business there, and as long as DeFi is able to sort of grow roots and interact with the real financial system and provide its benefits, then you'll just have this undeniable proof of the good things that it can do, right? And there'll be real world examples of the blockchain traceability being used to fight crime and prevent money laundering and all of these things, right? That are all of this rhetoric that's right now being turned against us. You'll have actual evidence that it also that it helps the regulators as well, right? There are always both pros and cons to every new technology, and as long as it's able to sort of live out in the real world and show that it's possible to coexist and synergize with traditional finance, then eventually the great powers will come around, right? They'll, I mean, to the point that was already made, right? They'll sort of wake up and the dark times will end, and the world will have to embrace it. Because if a particular economy tries to fully ignore sort of the revolution in blockchain, I mean, it'll be like trying to ignore the internet, right? Something like North Korea, right? Where you're just totally isolated. And I don't expect that that's going to last a very long time. So it's really about, I think, looking for that resilience and diversification in the legal jurisdictions that you're dealing with.
I actually want to disagree there. Like the guys I've been speaking to in a lot of regulatory agencies, they're educated. They understand DeFi. They're not confused by what's going on here. The only thing they're confused about is why DeFi is busy stealing, their income streams and their revenue and their sources of cash flow. Because, like, we're coming for the banks. As much as we want to say we want to play friendly and we want to be, kumbaya around a fire and all of this stuff, I'm sorry, that's just not the case. Like when people realize the value of their own ownership, their own provenance, then they stop relying on third-party intermediaries. And I mean, especially if you start looking at like that Brian Armstrong tweet thread, right, on Coinbase, like what the SEC was going after, they're not going after the Coinbase IPO. They're not going after some company ICO. They're trying to get them to have the lending nomenclature as a security, which, if that precedence passes, then Compound, Aave, Yearn, Maker, it doesn't matter. Anything that takes an asset and returns an interest on that is going to fall under that. So all you're going to end up with, is you're going to end up with all of like people on this panel who really want to help, who really want to help educate them and help guide and help make bridges, end up being the martyrs and the victims who are going to, be the examples to show people, hey, don't build these protocols or you're going to go to jail. Hey, don't try and do these things or we're going to lock you up. And that's the precedence that's currently being set. So I mean, 6 months ago, I agreed 100%. I thought it was a lack of education. But I've spent a bit of time talking to a lot of these bodies now, and I have to say, they know what the hell's going on, to an intricate amount of detail, stuff I don't even know about some of these protocols. So I don't know. I'm struggling to see this as some kind of, hey, we want to work together, and more screw you guys, we're going to shut this down and we're going to make it miserable for anyone else that tries.
I think there's always interest parties on every side. Whenever there's markets, there's always market participants and different kinds of interest groups. But I kind of agree on both of the perspectives. But also I think the education is still kind of an ongoing work all the time. So for example, in talking to different bodies, usually you get the most innovative people to talk to you. So let's say every agency might have their section of innovation where they understand very well what's going on, but then they might have different other departments where there might be a bit of let's say I won't say disconnection, but kind of a different perspective towards innovation, and they have different kinds of missions there and objective, which is pretty fine. What's interesting to see is that essentially kind of I think what's most important besides the education is the communities that are around DeFi and the whole DeFi community as itself, because there's many fields in different industries which are self-regulated. And the reason they might have self-regulation is because they're able to establish a consensus within the community what kind of things are good for their own community and their users as well. And kind of I think the power of why we're using DeFi is because people are within this community thinking the way of the DeFi protocols are bringing a lot of transparency. They're bringing better execution and capability that you can innovate quite a lot. And having these things, and having a strong community that is actually embracing those values and are able to deal, let's say, bad behavior or whatever that could be, that's a strong sign where you might not need to regulate certain kind of behavior. But on the same side, I would like to say that smart contracts by itself, by their nature, are actually in public blockchain are very, very good and tools for actually understanding the markets and bringing transparency. For example, each and every second, you see the whole risk exposure, the whole exposure and transaction activity in DeFi that is, for example, built on Ethereum and other public blockchains, which means that you not only get exposures on different kinds of collaterals in different protocols, but also it means that anyone, any part of the world can actually create better risk management tools for these communities and protocols, essentially not just creating transparent finance, but on top of that, you create better finance, and risk-aware finance. And especially you can create smart contracts that allow certain behavior and for example, especially as newcomers are coming. So I think there's work to do on both of the sides to understand things, but also kind of understand that how big the DeFi community is, that there's so many people that they actually want to decide what they do in terms of finances, and bringing more tools into the space as the DeFi community whether it's regulators or whether it's third-party businesses building those tools, that will be very helpful. But I think the direction is going towards very good path, because most of the DeFi activity is in different kinds of decentralized protocols. And there's also like the education part, what Robert and Rune mentioned about what is a DAO and what isn't a DAO, what's, for example, decentralization, that are actually going towards the direction where most of the activity are in protocols that where the communities are very aware like what is good and fair finance end of the day. And I think like expanding that realm is where the most of the work is needed.
Yeah, echoing to the above panelists, from my experience, like I know some, there are some friends of mine, like from Chinese financial institutions and regulatory institutions, and some of them do holding BTC and do know the basic knowledge of DeFi. Yeah, so some of them are well educated actually, but I think we cannot take the regulation institution as a person, but there are some different opinions from these institutions. Like some are voted yes and some are voting no. Some are well educated, but some are not. Yeah, so there are different kind of opinions inside there. Yeah, but I think what we are lacking now, it is a communication bridge between the DeFi builders and with this regulatory institution. Yes, and also what we lack is the communication bridge from the founders from different places and countries. Because what I am observing now, it is like everyone is feeling the uncertainty of the regulatory environment. Founders from Asia didn't understand what is happening from the SEC, right? And the founders from the US are afraid of expanding the market to Asia, to Chinese, because they are afraid of the Chinese government. Yeah, so, but I think this information can be more transparent. Like if maybe Qiao can bring up a forum or chat room for founders and builders in DeFi Alliance, and we can all share about our knowledge and experience, what kind of regulation and policies we are facing in our own place, and we can share with everyone. I think this kind of information will be much helpful, yeah, for the current stage, yeah, because there is still lots of uncertainty, yeah. But I think the direction is good, because in the end, the government is encouraging innovations, because each government is afraid of, other government is smarter than themselves. So I think they are pretty cautious to this kind of thing. Yeah. So actually, what I hope is maybe there can be some, chat room for this kind of topic, and we can share more information about it with each other. Yeah, just like now. Yeah.
Cool. Really appreciate everybody's insights. I think we have 5 more minutes. I want to give everyone an opportunity to share their something that they're currently building on. They're currently building something they're really excited about. So who wants to start?
I can go first. Because I think it's quite relevant to what we were just discussing. So it's in Maker. We've been trying to do real assets and this integrating DeFi protocols and the decentralized world with the traditional financial system and the real world, and the trouble has always been in this connection between the two, sort of like the jump where how does a protocol interact with the legal system, right? And we've tried a bunch of different solutions and sort of made went down various paths. One example is, for instance, Centrifuge, which is the first real asset that was onboarded to the Maker protocol, and there's a whole range of centrifuge-based, like vaults in Maker, where basically you use tokenized, like you sort of tokenize the legal asset and use that as collateral, and then you can actually auction off this like legal claim directly. But something I'm incredibly excited about is a very recent collateral that was added to Maker, which is also a real asset solution, but it's based on a trust, so Delaware statutory trust, where essentially what's happened is that you have an actual like a world-class trust company or world-class trustee. In this case, WSFS it's called, which is sort of one of the world's really big trustees that manage these globally significant Delaware statutory trusts. And it's set up to actually listen to basically directions from Maker governance, and through that you actually have this connection made in a very, very reliable way. So you could potentially put billions of dollars in this type of structure, and you would actually still be safe because you have sort of the entire weight of the system of Delaware trusts protecting the integrity of the recourse fundamentally. So I think that's really exciting because this is using a trust and setting it up so that the trustee can understand governance votes from a DAO. I think that's a pretty straightforward solution that you should be able to copy all over the world. And I think basically the only test that really matters is, can you get a high class, like a world class, top tier trustee to sign up for this? And if you can do that, you got something that is solid, I believe. So I think that could really be a big step forward if we can start really scaling that up.
I can jump in. Oh, no, Diane, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I will be very quick. Yeah, I mean, first thing is, I think the high capital efficiency will be next main topic for DeFi. Yeah, and I'm happy to see there are more and more main trading protocol improving their market making algorithm for higher capital efficiency, and that is what DODO has been focusing on since we founded last year. Yeah, the proactive market maker is working very well, and we are allowing more and more professional and institutional market makers to earn money in the PMM strategy and framework. And another thing is DODO now is expanding the assets, not just fungible tokens, but also non-fungible tokens. We are building new trading model, something like peer-to-pool trading model to help to give the NFT asset a better liquidity market. Yeah, Stani, please.
Those are very interesting stuff everyone is working. In Aave, we are kind of like we see ourselves as Web3 builders. We don't particularly want to only focus on decentralized finance, but we think it's a kind of like the important building block in the whole Web3 ecosystem. And now we're building also a social graph that we want to actually deploy quite soon during this year. And the idea is to allow users that are used to Web3 in different kinds of social media platforms that they have a common social graph, and developers can build different kinds of social applications on top and see how maybe DeFi can empower that and experiment. And the Aave community itself is pretty much looking to experiment by deploying different kinds of contracts in the Avalanche ecosystem and looking at other ecosystems, what's happening there. And recently there was deployed cross-chain governance bridge, which is amazing because you can actually the one community can govern different protocols across different networks, which brings more decentralization. That's pretty much like what we are working at the moment, and the other communities looking at.
I'll quickly mention Compound Treasury, which is a product that allows you to earn 4% interest on US dollars. It does so by providing these dollars to become crypto dollars through USD coin and then into the Compound protocol. And this product is, registered as a security. And it takes a very different approach to allow institutional customers and ecosystem participants to access DeFi.
Okay, so interestingly enough, dictionary.com, a shill is a hustler or con person who tries to convince other people to buy something or think something is great. The shill has ulterior motives for their actions, usually because they are the seller or have something to gain from the product that sells well. So anyway, I didn't know that. I thought I'd share it, completely not related to the current conversation. All I will say is, people, make sure you drink lots of water, go for walks, exercise, sleep at least 6 hours a day, hug the people you love, and wear sunscreen.
A great close to this fantastic panel. Thank you, everybody.